Believe it or not, Linux boxes show up in a variety of places. If you want to find out how to secure them, stay tuned.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello everyone, and I'm glad you could make it back for us because we're going to be talking about Linux hardening and securing, something that I wished I'd have known way back when I first started. And I think we just need to go ahead and start with, why would I care about learning how to really lock down a Linux system?
Well, you could have avoided the great data breach of your system back in 2009. I remember it was epic. It was great. There was a lot of tears on Justin's part. But securing Linux systems, obviously, you're going to encounter them from time to time in your environment. Want to make sure that you have the tools and techniques to harden them up, prepare them against the wilds that is the internet. So without further ado, I say we jump into what can we do to harden these things? And the first stop on that journey is, I'm going to say, updates, right? Once you install Linux, maybe you're doing a fresh installation, run the updates on the thing. And then guess what? Create an update strategy and regimen that you're going to follow and adhere to like a religion, okay? Because if you don't, these are the things that lead to compromise. I didn't patch this, I didn't patch that. Now, are there instances where you can't do that? Yes, but those should be the exceptions and not the rule. We shouldn't have a bad security as our modus operandi. It should be good security. Doing updates is a great way to secure up a system.
Matter of fact, interesting story. Started a job, hanging out, found out we had a dev server running locally, and I was like, oh, well, let me see. Oh my goodness, this is wicked out of date. I ran the updates. I did break it. However,
yeah. Side note.
But that's why people don't run updates.
Right.
They're like, it's going to break. Well, okay, you might need to run duplication, right? Let me try it in a staging or a test environment. If it breaks, let me figure out how it breaks so I can actually do that in your production, whatever it may be. In addition to, if you run them more often, you have less catastrophic breakage because this was like 2 years old. The only way I could ever justify that, and I worked with some companies that did, they would air gap their systems and they would manually apply updates in like a specific interval. It still made me nervous, but I guess it worked for the security policy.
Yeah, and I think that it's good for us to remember that this is just best practices. If you can do it, you should, kind of thing, right? There's always those edge cases where I can't update this system because it breaks the software or whatever, right? Yeah, that occurs, and then we use other security controls to try to manage that. But if you can update, create yourself an update cycle and follow it as closely as you possibly can, because that's going to alleviate many of the vulnerabilities to the system. And you kind of hinted on something else you said about duplication. Backups, right? Create backups. If you're not backing up the system, you're just waiting for a disaster. And if you can recover because you have a good backup system in place, again, kind of goes back to the patching and policies, or the patching policy, create a backup policy as well. We're going to keep this much data for this amount of time, and these are the times and dates and ways in which we are going to back this system up. Now, you can do backups with something like Bacula, right? Great system works. You could just use DD. Whatever it is. Yeah, Justin's going, oh.
Yeah, don't mess up your DD command, though. Data destroyer.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah.
Don't want to be your own threat actor.
Yeah. And I just back it. Oh, it's broke.
Yeah.
It is
Do we
gone.
have a backup? Because
yeah,
I'm going to need that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a backup strategy is a good idea. Just make sure you do it correctly so that you're not destroying yourself. What else can we do? Use things like encryption, right? Encrypt the file system. Someone snatches a laptop and that file system is encrypted. Well, yeah, they got a shiny new laptop, but they don't have data. So it's a great way and an easy win for us as a team as we deploy mobile devices that have Linux installed. Or even if we have old disks themselves and we're decommissioning, at least they're encrypted, and hopefully we're also destroying them as well as we decommission. But, again, layered defense, right? What else can we move into? What's another good one? What do you think, Justin?
I think if you're going encryption, because anytime I think encryption, I go, oh, there's usually a password to get past that encryption. We should probably use good passwords, right?
Yeah, good password policy has been a common thread throughout this series, and for very good reason, because password policies can make or break you, right? You can have all the security in the world, And it's like buying a 10-ton vault door, right? Things steel, reinforced concrete, bunkered, blah, 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 right? And you've got a $3 padlock on it. What good does that do? And that padlock is now representing a weak password. It is a weak point. You're only as strong as your weakest link, right? And passwords tend to be that weak link. As I've hung out and talked with and listened to penetration testers, they, by and large, are saying, I'm getting in using credentials. Weak credentials is just, it's an easy win for us all the time. So a good password policy. So run into that Etsy PAMD, make sure you're setting up good complexity so that you don't give them that easy win.
Well, Daniel, I tell you what, good password policy, I'm totally on board, except I really just want to make sure that I can do everything that I want to do without typing in a password. I want to be super user all the time. That's totally cool, right?
Oh yeah, it is totally cool. Maybe. Well, not all the time. You typically don't want to log in as an administrator all the time. That's a good policy. So restrictive access is it's a good technique to use, right? You just want to make sure that restricted access to the system is something that you employ. I don't always want Justin to be able to, or to be logged in as an administrator. You want to restrict root access as well. So maybe he is an administrator, but he doesn't need to do everything in his day-to-day life as that. And this is what we call the principle of least privilege. So what we're saying is, if you don't need to do that all the time, or if you don't need access to it at all, don't give access to it. So if Justin's just a standard user and he does standard user stuff, what business would I have giving him access to sudo certain things? Now, maybe that is the case, but I want to be very restrictive in that. I want to be selective, and I want to do it in a proper way. So since sudo is kind of the gateway drug into root access a lot of times, you want to be very secure and make sure that how you implement it, you do it as best as you can. Try to think down the road, if I were an attacker, how would I leverage this if I was to gain access through Justin's accounts? Could I maybe privilege escalate using some of the privileges that he's been given? So very important things for us to think about. But if I have fewer users with that kind of access, I'm not just giving that out to the entire landscape, as it were, then that's going to be a much more difficult lift to any attacker that does gain access.
And speaking of that, right, we don't want to privilege escalation, none of those. Unfortunately, a lot of times on Linux systems, services, web servers, whatnot, come with service accounts. Should I just go ahead and just turn everything on? I need Telnet, SSH, FTP, you know what, SMTP, go ahead and turn that on. I need to install Nginx, PHP, MySQL, all of that, right?
Have it not need it than need it not have it.
Exactly, right?
It's just sitting there with, this is a bad idea. Yeah. And this is one of the security things. So you have services. Should I enable them? Should I disable them? If you have unnecessary services, then you're doing it wrong, right? If you're not using it, you want to disable it. Now, sometimes you install something and it enables a service. So this is where we kind of have to put our admin hats on and do things right? Just think ahead, think securely, think in that vein. But if I have a service I'm running, so if I do a check, I say, oh, look, let me just check all the services that are running on this box. Why is MySQL running? Why does it have access to the network? Do I need that on this box? Oh, we were using it for testing and forgot to turn that off, right? That can happen. That's fine. But turn it off. Go around and turn those services. Disable any unnecessary, unused services that you come across inside of your Linux systems. Go a long way. All right, let's move on. I think this moves us into firewalling. Firewalling is a great way to control access to your system. This is, again, tales old as time kind of thing. If you have network activity, and even if you don't, I still highly recommend firewalling, because you never know when something gets patched down to the wrong place and now it's exposed, right? So just having a default firewall running. In Linux, you're typically talking about the universal firewall, what was previously known as IP tables. You could probably still use IP tables at this point in time. I think it's still installed on Kali, and Justin's just laughing. He's like,
I'm having like a panic attack. I can't tell you how many times I've locked myself out of a box trying to set IP tables rules. I'm like, and then you
lock yourself out.
Cool, man. I'm gonna have to destroy that one and bring it back up. So just be careful, because if it's a purely remote system, things can go awry.
When you're talking about cloud services, things of that nature, it's an easy way to get found out in the weeds real quick. So I understand why people are leery and weary of doing this, but that's why we create ourselves a procedure. What is the way we do this? Once we figure it out, we spin up the thing that's going to be production. We implement that secure practice, which is turn the firewall on, set the policies, create access, control lists, and bada bing, you're off to the races. So firewall's a great way to go. Let's see here. I guess when it comes to that, we move on really quickly into logging of what's going on. Who's trying to access the system? I got to get my eye on that. How do I do that? Well, I have to make a record of it. Now, good news is logging is a lot of times an easy button win. You just install something that starts logging by default. But sometimes it's not. You have to make sure that logging is enabled. And then from there, now you got to do the other side of that lift, which is monitoring. What good are logs if I'm not actually looking at them, right? Justin, I know you love that part of this, right?
So, interesting story. So, had a discussion with the security team. I was building an application. They were like, yeah, you need to log. I was like, oh, well, do you want me to put them to a syslog server? Do you want me to put them in a particular directory? Do you do a sync? I just put them somewhere. I'm like, hold up. Well, how is that meaningful? And they're like, well, we'll find them. I go, you're probably not monitoring like you should. So whatever, I'll put them somewhere.
Yeah, you just have to get something going. You can't just have that attitude of, we'll get to it. No, it has to become policy and procedure that we do X, we monitor with X software or X utility, and then the procedure is to actually go in on these days or every day or whatever, and we look at those. Maybe we're using a SIEM to help with that, make it a whole lot easier, centralized management, syslogging, whatever. Do it, look at it, set up alerts. Those types of systems go along with monitoring to help that out, and it'll help you be a whole lot more hardened and secure when it comes to that. Let's move on. Let's talk about antivirus, anti-malware, endpoint protection, right? If we're not using endpoint security at all, well, you're probably going to end up with malware, right? And then malware leads to further compromise of maybe they're using malware for command and control, pivoting further into your network. Malware is a nasty thing, especially when you're talking things like rootkits. You get a rootkit installed, that's a bad day, right? Because they're difficult to remove and they're difficult to know when they were installed. So even if you have a backup, like, well, is this backup infected? Maybe it waited for 3 months before it actually activated. And I go to last week's full backup. I think I'm good. I'm not good. I'm still infected, right? So that could be the problem with rootkit. But if I just employed some endpoint security, I could have just not been in this situation to begin with. So I highly recommend deploying that. And then once all that's said and done, like, we've gone through X, Y, and Z. Again, this is not an exhaustive list of things you can do to harden. This is just things you can do to harden Linux systems. But you do want to be testing them. Test your security controls. Make sure that they're active, working as expected. Maybe if they're generating logs or doing some sort of monitoring, creating alerts, that those things are actually occurring. Test those systems. Do things like vulnerability assessments. Do things like penetration testing, right? You just want to verify that what you're doing is working, because again, it's almost like that logging situation. If you are logging and not monitoring, what good are the logs? If I am implementing security and I'm not verifying that it's actually doing what it is I think it should be doing, I feel like, you ever watched Robin Hood Men in Tights?
Yep.
Right? Funny movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's hysterical. And then his helper, his name is Blinken. He's a blind man. He's standing up in the crow's nest, and he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Guessing? I guess there's no one coming." You are blinking if you're not looking into these things. If you're not testing, if you're not monitoring, you are blinking, right? You're just guessing, hoping, and that is not a strategy. So there we go. That is some of the things that we can do to harden up our Linux systems.
Now, Daniel, those best practices, I know when I first started and I was given some sysadmin duties, if you will.
Yeah.
I was like, that's a lot. I don't know anything about that. However, there are helps if we have some hesitation about how to proceed, right? We have hardening guides that can make our life easier.
That's right. Hardening guides. When you say make our lives easier, the cool thing is like if you're watching this right now, you live in 2020 or beyond, right? And this is not the first time somebody's had to do this. And somebody went, I should write this down and give it to Billy, and Billy can do it. And then he can pass that on to Sally, and Sally can reproduce these efforts. So there are myriads of hardening guides. Some of them are platform specific, some of them are operating specific, environment specific, you name it. There's a hardening guide to go along with what it is you are trying to do. And guess what? A plan is better than no plan. So I went out on the internet, I found one. This one is Score from SANS, right? It's pretty simple. Here is the link. I'll try to remember to put that in the learner materials right here. There you go. And it's just a checklist for us to go through. We scroll down through here a little bit. It'll start that hardening guide, kind of give you an overview, give you some helps right here. So some of these things require sudo or su. Vi is your editor. Maybe you're not using that. Just kind of getting you going on here. But once you get into this, here you go. If you're doing updates, if you're in Debian or Ubuntu, Kali, etc., use apt-get. If you're in Red Hat, Yellow Dog, CentOS, use yum. Here's how to do the things that we're telling you to do, but do them, right? If you're in SUSE, you got Zipper. Hardening the system, talking about installing Bastille. I think they go into AppArmor. Yeah, installing AppArmor. Things that you can do to sandbox the applications on your system so they don't reach out and do things they're not supposed to do, right? Shows you how to implement them, work with them, get them going. It's a step-by-step. This makes our lives easy. This actually gives us no excuse for not implementing good security to our Linux-based systems. Gives you any side of the world you're working with. So if you're running those Debian or Ubuntu or Red Hat-based variants, Yellow Dog, whatever, you got no excuse. They're all right here. They're going to help you out. And of course, if you don't like this one or it doesn't really fit your environment, find another one. There are plenty, like I said, there are plenty of them out there. And it gives you that checklist. I can walk through it and go, I have done this. I have done this. I have done this. And if ever you find yourself in front of a judge going, why were your customers' data compromised? You go, well, Judge, we tried real hard, but them hackers are tricky and they found a way around us. But I can honestly look you in the eye and say, we tried. And that's what hardening guides can help us do.
And I'll be honest, if I'd have known about it, it would have made my job easier. I would have felt better because I was just taking shots in the dark. Like, we were on Red Hat systems. Red Hat has a hardening guide for Red Hat systems. So you can go find that. You can use the one from SANS. I just like having a checklist.
I do.
Knowing what those services are needed for, why we should enable them. It just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. And I didn't feel that way a few years ago, but you should. Now, we got more GSEC coming at you, but for this episode, we're going to go ahead and bounce. So signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Justin Innocent.
I'm Daniel Lowry.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.